little interactive part to this today, and what we'll do is we'll go through this presentation, then we'll take a break for lunch, and we'll move on for lunch after that.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We really appreciate the opportunity, especially as we move around the state, to bring specific projects before you, the county advisory boards, and interested public. It's a great opportunity for us to showcase some of our efforts in areas out of those areas that the commission typically deals with. So we appreciate the opportunity today. We have two updates. The first update is from the Fisheries Division and pertains primarily to recovery efforts within the Muddy River system, and then that'll be followed by a presentation from the Diversity Division on Gila monsters, and we'll actually have an opportunity to, we have a Gila monster petting zoo at lunch, so we'll have an opportunity to get up close and personal with one of our cold-blooded relatives, just like Christmas. So with that, I turn it over to Administrator for the Fisheries Division, John Schoberg, to introduce his topic and his staff.
I think the commission should probably turn around over to these chairs for the presentation. So.
I think I'll stay. We can see.
Hey, for the record, Fisheries Division Administrator John Schoberg, thank you, Director Wasley, Chairman Wallace, and Commissioners. As we talked a little bit when we were going over Commission Policy 33, Fisheries Division has a very extensive native aquatic wildlife program. There are 22 listed fish species in Nevada listed under the ESA, and other 22 species that are specifically state protected, and another large suite of aquatic species that are species of conservation concern and priority in the Wildlife Action Plan. One of those species that has been a significant emphasis and effort is the Moapa dace and also other native fishes that occur in the Muddy River system here in Clark County. The department was fortunate enough to receive some special funding, 4+ year special funding grants from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to assist us in implementing conservation and recovery for those native species in the Muddy River. I'd like to introduce Amos Ream. He is a fisheries biologist in the southern region, and he is one of 2 full-time staff we were able to hire through that grant to make some significant efforts towards recovery of the Muddy River ecosystem for aquatic species. And he has a presentation that hopefully you will enjoy.
Yeah, I don't want to push the button yet. How far down do I have to lean? Can everybody hear me here? I think I'll just try holding it. Obviously, the Muddy River is aptly named. Just put this picture up here to show you. It is pretty muddy. Headwaters are up around Moapa, the town of Moapa. It's a thermal spring system that heads downstream into Overton, Logandale area, fills Lake Mead. This slide here is basically just to show you the cooperative part of the Cooperative Recovery Initiative, the grant that we got our money from. All of these partners are necessary and have been a great help to getting this work done. NDEL may be taking the lead and implementing this part of this project, but overall recovery requires a large cooperative effort all the time. Whoop, skip too fast. As John said, I'm a native fisheries biologist, so the native fishes in this stream, the Moapa dace and the White River springfish, are endemic to the headwaters, the thermal hot springs up at the top. The other 2 species, the Moapa speckled dace and Moapa Virgin River chub, are also native to the system and found nowhere else. The Virgin River chub actually is in the Virgin River as well, but since they became segmented, this population of a threatened species is not officially listed and managed basically by us preemptively because it's outside the range of the rest of the species. If you know anything about the Muddy River, mostly you know about the top, the headwater springs. Fish and Wildlife has a little refuge up there. You can see the fish through the little windows. That's the Moapidace down in the lower right. And up at the top, it's the springfish. Over on the left, you can see some of these small springs. They all accumulate into the main river downstream. But in the early 90s, blue tilapia showed up there. And everything that makes a fish a great fish in a pond makes it a terrible fish once it gets out in the wild. They raise these because they grow fast. They make a lot of meat fast. They reproduce like crazy. They'll live in the worst water. They'll eat anything. But they do all those same things once they get out into the river. They outcompete natives. They eat all the vegetation in a stream. That can even destabilize banks based on how much they're eating. They're aggressive as all heck. They're cichlids, so even if they're not eating something, they're chewing its fins off and letting it roll downstream. You can see it's a controlled species. We don't want it in the river. It's spread from the Muddy River down into Lake Mead and established. We've even found it in a couple other places already. If you know anything about tilapia, they're bad news. If you've heard of Florida, they've almost wrecked the fishery there. They're groups, sportsmen's groups that actually just target tilapia to try to make some small impact. There are no limits on take. Everybody's out there with a cast net trying to get them, and we're hoping to do anything we can to prevent these guys from getting any more established here than they already are. They're not the only problem, though. You've got your typical minnows, the mollies and mosquito fish, the red shiner. Got a couple of sport fish that have showed up in the river. We don't manage this stream as a sport fish stream, but they always show up. You got bass and catfish. And you've got what we call trash fish or rough fish, the carp, the black bullhead, crayfish. None of these belong in the system. All of these have problematic impacts. Like I said, we only had those few native species, and we have quite a few more of the non-native invasive ones. What can you do about it? Well, there's always nothing. You can sit there, you will lose all those species, sacrifice the habitat, risk further spread, which is what we're trying to prevent. Occasionally you can dewater some streams. That's often difficult, if not impossible, and it can create some upset. I've got two types of manual removal options down there. You can net them out, you can trap them out, you could even do fish and line like those sportsmen's groups are trying down in Florida. But that doesn't work very well. And I know what I do when I have a pest problem in my house. I go for the pesticide. So what we've opted for is the one NDEP approved pesticide that's still being produced here is rotenone. It's a natural compound found in roots of a legume plant. It's specifically targeting gilled organisms. It's absorbed through the gills to block metabolism. And since it's going in that particular manner, it's effective in such low concentrations that it's nearly non-toxic to most other large mammals. So it's fairly easy to deal with, and it can be deactivated by adding a water purifier to the river downstream of it. Prior to initiation of this part of the project, these fish got into the top, the warm springs at the very top, and in 2009 they did a couple treatments trying to get them out. 2010 and 11 they did a few more treatments, keeping going. 2011 they finished them all up in the next winter, till finally 2012 we've got a guy there pulling the last couple out by hand. So this is a difficult process, especially up in the complex marshy areas in the headwaters, and all of this had to happen before we could even come in and do anything, because like they mentioned earlier, you've got to work top down, because you could do everything down at the bottom. If there's 6 up at the top, they're going to reproduce and keep filling in downstream. So once a few years had gone by and we'd felt fairly certain that everything was out of the top, we could start working downstream on this project. Each one of those squares there represents a barrier because you can't handle this river all in one chunk. So we got to break it into pieces so that you can work from the top to the bottom. We've got flow-through barriers designed so that once we complete a project, fish can actually travel back up and downstream. But once you put these boards in, you've got to drop so that the fish, you can work from the top down to that barrier, get that area clean, and then work from that barrier next downstream to the next segment. There's a lot of preparation before you can actually apply any chemical. The first thing you need to know is what's out there. So we did some surveys. This is just one sample reach that we did on the Paiute property. You'll notice 8 virgin river chub in that whole 2.5 mile reach. That's not very many fish. Like I said, these are fairly critically imperiled species. 117 tilapia up there. Things weren't looking good. Some of the things that you need to learn from the surveys is where's water going. Those arrows point to the diversion. If you've got clean water coming in one way and hot water coming out the other, chemically active water, you need to know where it's going to go to detoxify it, and you can't let any clean water come in or fish are going to survive a chemical treatment. Also, that star up there, we found a large breeding grounds. You can see tilapia make nests like your sunfish, and they concentrated up in that area, so you know you have to pay a little more attention up there because there's going to be a greater population, and make sure you get that area pretty well. You also need access, not just landowner access and sufficient coordination with all the groups that you're involved with, but you'll see over there on the left, that's our river. Kind of hard to see the whole river, and if you can't see the river, you don't know what's in the river. So we had to do a little bit of manual maintenance of the stream just so that you could get in and out of it. On the right there, that's about a 50-foot backwater that if we hadn't been able to see the stream, this thing would never have gotten chemically treated by the rotenone going down the river. We actually pulled over 100 tilapia out of that one backwater in one summer. So had we gone ahead and tried to do this treatment without all this preparation, without being able to see the river, at least 100 fish would still be in that river. And the last thing before treatment is you need to try to salvage the native fish out of the reach you're about to treat, move them upstream, or translocate them somewhere else for storage until you can put them back into a cleaned area. And there's just a couple pictures of our salvage efforts with the chub on top and the Moapa speckled dace on the bottom. Our actual application of rotenone occurred on January 20th. First step, you got to have some drip stations delivering the chemical. There's a picture of those up at the top of the Warm Springs area, headed down in the main stem river. You've got to go down the stream and see every little eddy anywhere that the stream flow is not going to carry the chemical. You also need to backpack spray and make sure that you get complete coverage so that there aren't refuges for a few fish to hang out, because you don't want to go to the trouble of doing all this work and have a couple fish survive and then have to do it again next year. And of course, you don't want this chemical escaping downstream of where you're working, or it's just going to continue on down. So you've got to dump a water purifier in. We use potassium permanganate. It's a common water purifier. Most of the water treatment plants will use that. It just does have the interesting effect of turning the water bright purple, and actually scares people more to see the purification process than it does to see the application of a pesticide. That's the 2.5 mile reach that we treated from the Warm Springs Road down to the Paiute diversion. And since that treatment, well, during that treatment, we saw about 300 to 400 tilapia floating downstream. Not okay anymore. That's what we wanted. No tilapia have been observed in those reaches since the treatment in 4 successive intensive sampling efforts. We translocated about 400 virgin river chub from various downstream reaches up into the top reaches during the winter. Retention of the translocated virgin river chub has a little asterisk there because chub are a migratory species. They travel up and down the stream quite a bit, not only seasonally but daily. And you saw those barriers in there. They head downstream of one of those barriers. they're not getting back up it until we get to the point where we can pop out those boards and allow them to travel upstream. So we do still have retention of these, but over time, that's eventually going to drift downstream further and further until we don't have a large population up there. Hopefully, we're going to keep some up there, and our efforts will move fast enough that we can establish connectivity once again. Those translocated Virgin River chub also reproduced. That was kind of the whole thing. We wanted to see these fish get up there and actually make babies, and they did it, and they did it well. Here's a histogram of the reproduction. They actually went 3 bursts. Each one of those peaks is kind of a slightly different time frame. They're not really growing faster. They're growing at about the same rate. But on top of that, you can see that some of those fish, even in June, had already reached nearly the adult size, which is about 100 and 120 millimeters. And one of the problems they'd seen in the biannual monitoring of this species is even though they do reproduce pretty regularly, most of the reproduction doesn't make it up to adult size. So they hadn't been finding the adults the next year except in rare occasions. And just eliminating the non-natives in that reach allowed these fish to get up to adult size rather quickly. And not just them, but a whole lot of them. These are just raw numbers. There's no actual population estimate in here because the raw numbers themselves tell you a story. Over a 9-fold increase in just captures from one year to the next. As I mentioned, there are 2 species in the lower section of the river, not just the chub. The speckled dace have been completely absent from most monitoring efforts in the last 5 or so years. So we spent some intensive effort over 2 months trying to find everyone in the stream we could. And all we got out of it was 19, which is pretty good from 0 to 19. We got them established at the Lake Mead Hatchery. We've got a biologist there who's kind of running the show and doing amazing things. In fact, these guys already made a couple babies accidentally. He hasn't yet tried to breed them, just growing them up at this point, but a few of them laid eggs, and we've got 3 little larvae growing up right now. We're hoping to get these reproducing and reestablish them upstream as well. This is a kind of historic event here. It's not an actual species, it's a subspecies of the speckled dace, but again, it's endemic. It only occurs in the Muddy River. We took it from 19, from nearly extinct to maybe we could recover this species with these hatchery effects and stocking them upstream. So our current plan and progress, we've completed the warm springs down to the Paiute set barriers. This December, we're hoping to do another larger section. We're gearing up for that right now. This will probably be the most useful section because it's got a large section where the chub have been reproducing successfully, and if we can get this cleaned up, it's kind of going to be their home until we get down to the bottom. And whoops, there's no backwards. And the last section is the most technically complex, down to the well siding barrier. That's where they take water out to fill the Bowman Reservoir, and downstream of it, habitat is segmented and more degraded. So that 10 miles or so is probably the most important that we can currently work with. Don't have any slides up there, but if anybody has any particular questions about the project and how it's going, I'm happy to answer them.
Would you share the mic with him so they can hear down? Thank you.
I'm just curious, can you tell us what organizations assisted you in some of the work?
The partners page on the front there, Clark County, SNWA, BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service. Who else, Brandon? The Paiutes, of course, NV Energy, the water districts.
Thank you very much. That's good. Thanks.
Where's that coffee?
All right, good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Newmark. I'm the chief of the diversity division, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you Jason Jones. He is our reptile biologist. Jason's been with the division for 4 years, and he comes to us from Utah. He has extensive Western experience, though. He's been in Montana and Idaho and Arizona, and so he really knows his reptiles. We have up to upwards of 75 species of reptiles in the state, and Jason is responsible for them all. He's located down here in Vegas, but he has statewide responsibility. And so you can imagine that's a heavy workload for him. And one of his many talents is using a broad network of volunteers. He works really hard with these volunteers to study our species, many of which are very cryptic and we know very little about. So without giving away too much, he's going to be talking to us today about Gila monsters, one of our difficult to find and study species. And then at the end, we have a few friends to share with you.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks to you all for having me. I don't know if you guys, I'm a really loud talker, so can you hear me? Because I typically have a lot of energy too, so I'm hard to pin down in one place. Okay, can you hear me out there? Okay, so to start this talk off, I really want to acknowledge, as Jen said, I have a whole crew of volunteers, and this right here, the orange, all the folks highlighted in orange actually volunteer time almost routinely to this project. All the folks that have, or agencies that have asterisks next to them, have either volunteered personnel or gear. Actually have given me transmitters, radios, you name it. Ask and you shall receive. Also, number one on the list is Perry Wolf, our veterinarian, because without her, none of this would really be possible. And all the other folks there as well. Oh, and I guess I should also acknowledge, this is kind of a partnership in a sense with BLM, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and NDOW. And also I want to acknowledge Gila monsters because we do relatively invasive things, which I'll walk you through. And maybe they're not so willing to cooperate, but they end up cooperating. So without them, this wouldn't be possible, obviously. So going back to the 50s, even before that, I think Gila monsters have had an interesting history in the southwestern U.S. They've kind of been demonized, as all venomous reptiles are, and largely that's due to the fact we don't know much about them. If you haven't seen this video, I really recommend it because it's hilarious. The monster depicted is not actually a Gila monster, but its close relative, and it's like 400 times the size of any monster you'll ever see in the wild. So check it out. It's like a 1950s cult classic. So a few things I want to kind of hit on, and this talk is kind of driven in this direction. And that's that Gila monsters are well adapted in the sense that morphologically their form and their body function is really well adapted to what they're doing on the landscape. And also behaviorally, how they go about their business. It's very well adapted. They're well suited for their environment. They're also old, and that's from an evolutionary perspective, and also they're just long-lived. They have a very long lifespan. They're considered to be rare. And that may be in part to the fact that they spend upwards of 95% of their life underground. They're also considered vulnerable, and that's not only from a collection standpoint, because they are a coveted species of reptile, but also from a climate and habitat change perspective. And then finally, they're just really cool. Has anyone, just by a show of hands, has anyone here seen a Gila monster in the wild? So like 2 people. That's pretty amazing. So seeing is believing, and as Jen noted before, I do have a couple show and tell critters, male and female, so you can see kind of sexual dimorphism. So to step back, since only 2 of you have seen Gila monsters, I'm going to guess that not many of you know anything about Gila monsters, or maybe very little. So the genus Heloderma is really interesting. Helo means nail-studded, and derma means skin. So these guys are nail-studded skin species. Now there are 2 species, and actually I won't talk about this really in detail, but the beaded lizard, which is its cousin essentially, is going to be broken up into 4 species here soon based on morphology and genetics. But we have the Gila monster, which is named actually after the Gila River. So if anyone calls him a Gila monster, just remind him it's after the Gila River. Now, it's called Suspectum, its genus, because they were suspected to be venomous. And sure enough, they are. If you note right here, this is a photo I took of a shed skin of a Gila monster. And you'll see that these little fragments right here, these little studs, actually are bone fragments. They're osteoderms. So these guys, literally, when you take an x-ray, you can see all this scattered noise. That's actually like beaded armor. So these guys are very well adapted for cruising around and potentially not being predated upon by much, at least as adults. Now, to give you a little backdrop as to where these guys occur, I think these 2 illustrations kind of give you the best bang for the buck. Up here are Gila monsters. Now, they're subdivided into 2 subspecies. Nevada has the banded Gila monster, which is way more beautiful than the reticulated Gila monster. Not to dig the reticulated Gila monster, but just a fact. And then you have the reticulated Gila monster. And note, this is the range of the banded Gila monster, with Nevada being essentially half of its known range. In California, you're probably more likely to see a Sasquatch than a Gila monster. So they're really rare in California. And in Utah, they only occur in Washington County, all the way up to Red Cliffs Reserve and maybe Hurricane. Now, as you go down, you'll see there's the reticulated Gila monster. It extends all the way into Mexico. And then as you go further down, these are the beaded lizards. And it's roughly to scale. So beaded lizards get huge, like 3 feet long. And you'll notice that they really occur tightly to the coast. So these have largely been considered something that's, it needs a lot of humidity. So it's kind of interesting that we actually have Gila monsters in the Mojave Desert, given how dry the Mojave Desert is. And I'll touch on that a little later in terms of their vulnerability. So I kind of like to use this little analogy, and to give you some context to how old Gila monsters are. Lois Leakey, a famous anthropologist, described Earth's history as a toilet paper roll. So roughly Earth's 400 sheets of toilet paper long, or old, and about 240 sheets in, that's when ocean life first emerged. And roughly each sheet's about 12 million years. So about 350 million years ago, reptiles first came upon the scene. 200 million years ago, you have dinosaurs emerging, then birds, and then roughly about 60 million years ago, dinosaurs went extinct. I like to joke that maybe Gila monsters caused the extinction of dinosaurs, because about 5 million years before they went extinct, that's when the first record of Gila monster or their ancestor occurs. And then right at the end, like essentially the 1,000th of a sheet, is when hominoids appear on the scene. And so to give you a glimpse of what their ancestors look like, they haven't really changed much in terms of their morphology. You see, this is a 60 million year old fossil, and its skeleton, you can see it's beaded, osteoderm. So really, not much has changed. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So these guys obviously are very well adapted to the land that they're inhabiting. Now, I think an interesting topic, and I tend to get more questions about envenomation than probably any other topic. Gila monsters are venomous. They're the only venomous species of reptile or lizard in the entire U.S. These guys, unlike a rattlesnake, which I'll compare to in the next slide, these guys exude venom from their chin glands. And as you can see right here, these are the venom glands, and it kind of comes up through by their teeth. These gnarly teeth are really good at massaging venom into their prey. It is a neurotoxin similar to that of a Mojave rattlesnake, but because it's such a low dose, you essentially will vomit or have other problems, feel maybe a little sick, but no one has ever died from a Gila monster bite. Actually, there was one case, the guy drank like a gallon of vodka and then got bit by a Gila monster, so I'm not sure why he died, maybe vodka. But this right here is when we were intubating a Gila monster. That's one of the teeth of a Gila monster, so they're really sharp. They're good at actually cutting their prey open. Now again, to compare Mojave rattlesnakes versus, say, a Gila monster, Mojave rattlesnakes have venom glands that are located in the upper jaw, as all rattlesnakes do. And what they do is as they open their mouth, you'll notice that their fang swivels, and it actually is able to puncture. Now, Mojave rattlesnakes and all the rattlesnakes actually inject venom into their prey, much like a hypodermic needle. So the old adage, like, just cut your wound and suck out the venom, is as silly as saying if you get a flu shot and you decide, like, within seconds that you didn't want that flu shot and you cut it open and started sucking it out, the doctor would obviously laugh, right? So that's why that doesn't work. Gila monsters, as I said previously, have this gland in the bottom, and it literally comes up through these grooves in the teeth, and that's how they administer venom to their prey. So really it's to immobilize prey. It's not really to kill them like a rattlesnake. Rattlesnakes kind of hit it, and then they coil back up, and the animal stumbles off and dies. Whereas the Gila monster, like a pit bull, grabs it, holds onto it, and hopes eventually the venom subdues the prey. And they're kind of aptly named in the sense that they are a monster underneath the bed of lots of small mammals and birds. They like to eat the young of critters, so that's probably why their venom doesn't have to be injected in such great quantities. So interestingly, you know, we kind of think of venom as something that can kill you, but more and more there's a lot of medical applications for venom. Interestingly, the Gila monster, the banded Gila monster, back in the 90s, they discovered a peptide in the venom that actually cures type 2 diabetes. So for almost 20 years now, they've been using this Exidin-4 in type 2 diabetes. More recently, it's been linked to solving Alzheimer's. So just last year, they ran some clinical trials on humans to see how that works. It'll be interesting to see what the results are. But it kind of is a paradigm shift from, you know, venom kills you to venom potentially can save you. I wouldn't recommend going and getting bit by a Gila monster if you have Alzheimer's or type 2 diabetes. There we go. So now on to kind of what we do with Gila monsters here at NDOW. So I'm going to give you a little brief overview from telemetry to increasing our ability to detect them on the landscape, which, as I noted previously, 95% of the time they live underground. So that becomes a problem in terms of estimating population sizes or knowing where they occur. And also, just as a note, we kind of engage in a thermal physiology study, which essentially is trying to help us understand their vulnerability to climate change. And we compared tortoises and speckled rattlesnakes. We also have been taking genetic samples from every single Gila monster. Nevada happens to be one of the only states that they're not really, we don't know much about their genetics. So in terms of population and how related they are to one another. And then I was recently able to send off a few Gila monsters to a geneticist who's going to do a full genome workup of the Gila monster. So Nevada's Gila monster will be represented in the full genome of the Gila monster, which is kind of cool. So we have kind of 4 biogeoclimatically distinct study sites. And what I mean by biogeoclimatically is that biologically these study sites vary, geologically these study sites vary, and climatically they're very different. And that's kind of a unique background to population monitoring. The 4th site is Valley of Fire. Now, 15 years ago, there was a study done on Gila monsters there, so we can kind of use that as a comparison to some of the stuff we're doing now. And to give you an idea, in the McCulloughs, we've done telemetry since 2013, where we've had 16 individuals transmitted, so we're able to get population or home range estimates for those. And then we've also been deploying trail cameras since about 2014, and we're up to, I think, about 22 as of last week trail cameras. I'll talk a little bit about why we're using trail cameras with Gila monsters. And then since 2010, we had 2 trail cameras set up on a known site in the Gold Butte area, which essentially gave us the idea to plant them in an area where we're doing real population monitoring using transmitted individuals. And then more recently, we've actually, with BLM's help, have started a project at Red Rock National Conservation Area where we have currently 6 individuals transmitted. I put an asterisk there because unfortunately in the last 4 months, 3 of those individuals have vanished. Actually, 2 died. One was presumed to be crushed by a person, skull was crushed. The second, we think, was probably hit by a dog and crawled under a rock where it died. And the third just happened to vanish during spring break. If you've ever been to Red Rock during spring break, there's a lot of people, so potentially could have been poached. And we know Red Rock has had a little bit of poaching going on in the past, and that dogs have killed have killed Gila monsters. So that's kind of where we have those assumptions. And then we have 2 trail cameras because we're kind of waiting for more permits from Red Rock. So as Jen noted, I wrangle a lot